My name is Klaus Krischok. I work for the Goethe-Institut. I'm currently head of the information department at the Goethe-Institut, which also involves internet activities. I'm on Facebook, I refuse to Twitter, and I am your host today. So thank you very much for attending this session during this Kultursymposium Weimar on Teilen und Tauschen, on sharing and exchanging. This is what we've planned today. We've got a panel with 3 experts. Apologies for everyone who doesn't like all male panels, but this just happened to be the case today. I will quickly introduce the 3 panelists. We will then hear an introduction, a presentation by Nicholas John, who's to my left. A response to his presentations by the 2 other speakers, who I'll introduce in a second. We'll then discuss on the panel, on this podium, and we will of course open up the discussion to you, the audience, shortly before we close. I was advised that we should be out here by 5 o'clock, so it's the honor and the sad duty of the moderator to cut panelists and audience short if they share too much information with us and run out of time. We are in Germany after all, right? Yeah, okay. Before I start, it feels a little bit odd to speak English here at the Goethe-Nationalmuseum, but that's what I was told we were supposed to do. But you can easily, and that includes the panelists, swap over into German if you want to. It also feels just a little bit funny to talk about social networks as we know them in these wonderful classical surroundings. So I've done a little bit of research and thought, well, how can you justify talk about Facebook and tweet in the Goethe-Nationalmuseum? And I actually found the clue. Wonder whether anyone knew. Goethe, actually, as you know, was a very, very ambitious letter writer. He also received a lot of letters from all over the world. Well, he was also a very, very clever man because he talked to the Baron von Thurn und Taxis, who held the German mail monopoly at the time in the early 19th century. Thurn und Taxis granted Goethe the right to receive and to send mail, of course, paper mail at that time, free of charge. So the provider for Goethe's correspondence and the provider for Goethe's social network was Thurn of Taxis, and somehow the idea of free mailing and free social network originates here. So this is the reason why we're doing this session here at this very place, okay? So that as an opening anecdote. Nicholas John sits to my left, and I welcome him very, very cordially because he comes from Jerusalem. He's a communication scientist at the wonderful Hebrew University in Jerusalem, but he's originally from England, from London, where he studied philosophy and social and political sciences. No, he studied that at Cambridge University. Is that correct? At Cambridge. His doctoral research, by the way, as I just found out, supervised by Eva Ilus, who's also part of this symposium, was carried out at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. His PhD dissertation was the first academic study of the internet in Israel. I'm very, very keen to hear a little bit more about that as well, if we can, maybe after the show. His current research interests include the technology and society, the internet as such, new media, Web 2.0, and sharing, things we're going to talk about today. When I last checked, he was writing a book tentatively titled The Social Logics of Sharing. This book offers an innovative approach to sharing in Web 2.0, specifically by linking it to sharing in other social spheres, namely consumption and intimate interpersonal relations. The intimate interpersonal relations is also something that links us up to what we talked about with Eva Ilus this morning. Okay, there we go. Florian Rötzer. Florian Rötzer sits to the far left, ist ein deutscher Journalist und Autor. Nach dem Studium der Philosophie, better go on in English, no? After studying philosophy in Munich, he worked as a free author and a publicist with the focus on media theory and media aesthetic. He also organized numerous symposia. Since 1996, Florian Rötzer has been the editor-in-chief of the online magazine Telepolis, and you still are, right? Yeah, that's still the case. Wonderful. His latest publications include Vom Wildwerden der Städte, I will not translate this, Ist das Leben ein Spiel, Is Life a Game, and Smart Cities in Cyberwar. Welcome, Florian. Georg Staebner in the middle is an engineer. How refreshing. He developed chips for mobile phones and network infrastructure for over 10 years. And then in 2013, he decided to spend more time with his kids, or shall I say, share more time with his kids. He also decided to use his knowledge to work on social improvements in society. He concepted and realized helptiers.net, and I'm sure he will talk a little bit about this today. He also publishes very, very actively on Helden- und Visionäre.de, Heroes and Visionaries.de. And you'll talk a little bit more about your work after that. Okay, welcome all three of them. I think they deserve a round of applause, please. Vielen Dank. Nicholas, onwards to your presentation.
Thank you very much indeed. And thanks to the Goethe-Institut for inviting me here. It's really a great pleasure to be here. So I'm going to talk about sharing in social networks. Of course, I mean digital social networks. Social networks weren't invented by Facebook, right? I mean, everyone has always lived in social networks, actually. But that was the title of the session, so I went with that. I've been working on sharing for a number of years, and my interest in sharing covers three main areas or spheres of sharing, I call them. The first is social media, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Another one is sharing economies. Okay, closer. I won't be mentioning that too much today, nor the idea of sharing in intimate relationships. What I mean by that is that I'm thinking of sharing as a type of talk, a type of intimate communication. Now, I don't just look at these three spheres of sharing in isolation. I think that they are related to one another, and I think that the notion of sharing ties them together. And so for me, sharing is a metaphor, and what interests me as a researcher about sharing is less practices of sharing and more the word itself and the work it does in different social spheres. It very much interests me that now sharing is a key word for contemporary digital culture, and that's something I wish to understand better. And this is important, I think, because as Lakoff and Johnson teach us, metaphors structure not just our language, but our thoughts, attitudes, and actions as well. So, for instance, I don't think we'd be calling sharing economies were it not for the sharing that we do online, which as a word emerged just before people started talking about sharing economies, at least in the sense that they mean today. All of my up-to-date thoughts about sharing can be found, will be found in the book. It did have a tentative title, which was scrapped, and the book, which you'll be able to get in October or November, is now called The Age of Sharing. And if you like what I have to say here, then feel free to put a reminder in your calendar for early November to check out if the book's on sale yet. Now, people say things like this about the internet. They say ever since this whole internet thing got started, people have been sharing stuff left and right. Or they say things like, the internet has always been about sharing between users. Well, that may well be, but actually, when you look at social network platforms, they didn't always talk about sharing. So to say today that the internet has always been about sharing is to take a contemporary term and superimpose it on the past in a way that maybe it's a bit anachronistic, because when they were, well, I'll show you what I mean shortly. So but I noticed in around 2010 that the word sharing really was all over the internet, and not just on social network sites. There were buttons to share everywhere. On Amazon, even today, if you want to write a review, you're invited to share your thoughts and not write a review, for instance. So I made use of the Wayback Machine, which is a service offered by the Internet Archive, to look at 44 different social network sites over a 10-year period, from 2000 to 2010. And using the Wayback Machine, I had a look at what the websites looked like at the beginning of every month. Of course, not all of these sites were there at the beginning of my research period and the end. In fact, only one was. But I looked at them month by month to see how they used a rhetoric of sharing. And I found three main things. The first is that at some point during the mid-2000s, the previous decade, social network sites started talking about fuzzy objects of sharing. Now, what do I mean by fuzzy objects of sharing? It's the opposite for me of concrete objects of sharing. So a concrete object, you can't really see this all that well, is, for instance, on this website, interesting websites, so share interesting websites. Or on YouTube in 2005, we were told to share that we can share your videos. Now, even websites, even social network sites that enabled us to share thoughts, I still consider this a concrete object of sharing. You know what you're meant to share if you're encouraged to share your thoughts. However, at some point, we started seeing things like this. LiveJournal lets you share your life. Okay, what does it mean to share your life? This is now fuzzy. This could be anything. And of course, that's the point. They want it to be anything. Or Windows Live, stay in touch and share your world. Okay, these are what I consider fuzzy objects of sharing. It's vague. It includes basically everything. And interestingly, for me, the sharing your world involves two senses of sharing, or two logics of sharing: the communicative, where sharing is a kind of talk, and the distributive, where you say upload photos and distribute images to other people. And the rhetoric of sharing here, in sharing your world, implies that you shouldn't live your life alone by yourself, but that you should share your life with other people. And how are we meant to do this? By email, photos, video, chat. In other words, through computer-mediated communication. And significantly, especially for my contention that we have a new kind of use of the word sharing emerging at this time, the terms share your world and share your life do not appear on any of the sites I looked at before 2007. So this is a relatively new way of talking about sharing. We can also see examples of social network sites that talk about sharing with no object at all. And I mean things like this. Facebook helps you connect and share with the people in your life. It doesn't tell us what we can share with the people, we just share. Other examples include this from MySpace: follow, get the latest, share. Or from PerfSpot, this is a social network site you've never heard of, socialize, share, discuss. So this kind of usage of sharing doesn't appear before 2005, where we just see the word share on its own as a kind of imperative, share, exclamation mark, which suggests to me that it is only now that social network sites assume that their users are familiar enough with the terminology of sharing that they can use the word without saying what we should be sharing: websites, thoughts, and so on. So in these examples that I've just shown you, the word share serves as a shorthand for participate in this website, in this platform. The third thing I found, looking at these 40 or so social network sites over a decade, were quite a few examples of these platforms changing their self-presentation as they went along. So, for instance, In 2005, the social network site Bebo, which was popular among teens in England around this time, presented itself in this way, where there is a little bit of sharing, but there's share photos you can see there. So that's a concrete object of sharing. And there's a whole load of other stuff that you can do. You can write on people's whiteboards and browse profiles and so on. In 2007, you can share, you're meant to share your life on Bebo, and in 2009, invite friends to share the experience. So the same functionality exists in 2005 and 2009, but the self-presentation of the website changes. We can see that here from also a social network site that you've never heard of. I mean, I hadn't heard of most of these either. But this is called Photolog. This is a social network site for sharing photos. And if you can see in bold, it says, see what's up with friends and family. And make it easy for your friends and family to see what's up with you. But in 2007, share your world with the world. I'll give you one more example of this. In 1999, from LiveJournal, this is the social network site, by the way, that was there in 2000 and still there in 2010. It says, let the world know the story of your life. I mean, today, no copywriter would write that. In 2006, there's some concrete objects of sharing appearing on their front page, share your thoughts and photos, and by 2007, the image I showed you before, share your life. So what we have here is, again, the same functionality, but with a new kind of framing. It's now all about sharing. Now, it's important to note that sharing sounds great. Sharing is pro-social. It's hard to share badly. Sharing is good. But because we're reflexive social actors, then people know this and sometimes try to use words to convince us that things are one way where perhaps they're another. And we can see this across the social media scape. So when someone tells all of their friends something on Facebook, for instance, that's called sharing. But when Facebook sells data about us to advertisers or provides data about us to the government, that's also called sharing. And you can read terms and conditions to find out of Facebook, of all of them, to find out the conditions under which the company will or will not share data with other third parties. And this is, I think, a kind of way of obfuscating the kinds of relations that truly exist between us and companies like Facebook. Now, I mentioned before I showed you this slide that my interest in sharing goes beyond social media, and that I'm also interested in these other kinds of sharing. Maybe later in the discussion, I mean, I have so many things to say about sharing. One argument that is made sometimes, particularly I think in relation to sharing economies, is that it's not really sharing. But I think that what I've seen is that across these spheres of sharing, there is something that the practices that we can see have in common. In a way, it doesn't really matter. I mean, in a way, it matters a great deal whether you are lending your neighbour your drill or renting your neighbour your drill. That makes a great deal of difference. Or whether you are letting someone sleep in your spare room for free, or whether you are renting out your spare room for money. Those clearly are different kinds of things. But in both instances, there, and with social media, and with the kind of talk we do in our intimate relationships, sharing in all of these instances refers, I think, to a kind of increased publicness. So that when we talk about sharing, we are talking about making something our feelings, our living room, a seat in our car, our photos from our holidays more public. And with that, I'll stop and thank you very much.
Two questions. I think we have Florian first.
So, wir machen das jetzt einzeln nacheinander.
Genau.
Ja. Okay, also ich habe ein bisschen Bedenken. Geht's? Ja, okay, ja. Wenn man ein Phänomen rein nach der Sprache aufschließt, also guckt, wann kommt ein Wort vor, und von da an beginnt dann sozusagen ein Phänomen. Meine These ist eigentlich schon die, dass das, was man jetzt Sharing nennt, einerseits eine Art von Modephänomen ist natürlich, um bestimmte Dinge zu verkaufen, vor allem Social Media, die ja natürlich die Leute hineinziehen wollen in ihre Netzwerke und gleichzeitig eben schauen, dass sie die Netzwerke dicht machen. Das heißt, die Netzwerke schließen sich ja gegenseitig ab und das Sharen findet dann nur innerhalb der Netzwerke statt. Das hatten wir ja schon mal am Anfang des Internet in den 90er Jahren, wenn Sie sich noch erinnern können oder vielleicht nicht. Gab es AOL oder CompuServe, da war man auch in einer Welt abgeschlossen vom Internet und das war dann sozusagen die große Befreiung in den 90er Jahren, als dann das Netscape und die Browser aufkamen, dass man dann sozusagen plötzlich auf die ganze Welt hinaus konnte und AOL und CompuServe und solche Dienste eben auch aufmachen mussten. Wir sind jetzt praktisch in der Rückwärtsbewegung in Art Gefängnisse hinein und das ausgerechnet noch mit dem Terminus des Sharing, das finde ich schon etwas seltsam. Wobei ich glaube auch, dass man auch gucken muss, dass das Sharing eigentlich eine Falle ist letztlich. Anfang zum Beispiel man kann das vielleicht im Parallel sehen zu den Aufkommen der Computerspiele in den 90er Jahren, gab es auch sozusagen die Art Ideologie oder Theorie, man muss die Leute versuchen, in das Spiel hineinzubringen. Das schafft man, indem man Interaktionen pro Minute macht. Also umso mehr Interaktionen da sind, umso mehr bindet das Spiel und zieht einen praktisch in das Geschehen hinein und hält einen darin gefangen auch. Und ich glaube, das ist das Prinzip des Likens und des Sharens und weiß Gott irgendwas, ist sozusagen auch der Versuch, die Menschen sozusagen zu bewegen und zu zwingen und zu verführen, immer mehr sozusagen in diesen Strudel hineinzugeraten, um sozusagen dort dann auch drin zu bleiben. Und was man dann eben vergisst, das Sharen in den Social Media ist auch verbunden mit Rankings. Also ohne Ranking funktioniert die ganze Sache nicht. Wenn kein Ranking stattfindet, wenn man nicht aufsteigen kann, wenn man nicht sehen kann, wie viele Freunde man hat, wie viele Follower man hat oder wie sozusagen welche Likes die anderen auf einen setzen, dann funktioniert die ganze Sache nicht. Also diese Art von Gamification, die ist, glaube ich, ganz zentral in den Social Media und das ist das, was sozusagen diese Tretmühle eigentlich ausmacht. Die Frage wäre eigentlich eher, wie kann man eigentlich aus diesen geschlossenen Netzwerken heraus und gibt es Ideen, wie man sozusagen diese Social Media tatsächlich social macht und nicht sozusagen als Gefängnisse installiert. Das wäre meine größere Frage an die Geschichte. Würde aber auch gerne nochmal zurückgehen, ganz kurz noch 2 Worte, weil ich schon glaube, dass das Internet und auch das, was man vielleicht in den 90er Jahren so kalifornische Ideologie nannte, nämlich dieser komische Verschnitt zwischen sozusagen einer Art Hippie-Ideologie und dem Neoliberalismus, der gerade in Kalifornien sehr stark aufgekommen ist, dass der sozusagen auch diese Netzwerke immer noch prägt. Also da wurde ja auch geteilt, man hat die Liebe geteilt, man ist aufs Land gezogen. Nach der linken Phase kam ja dann diese sozusagen Alternativszene auf. Man hat versucht, sozusagen eigenständig zu leben. Es gab dann auch Versuche, sozusagen alle möglichen Netzwerke zu gründen. Und aus diesem Geist sozusagen heraus ist eigentlich auch dann das Internet, ist der PC entstanden, ist das Internet entstanden, ist die Hacker-Ideologie entstanden, die ja auch sozusagen die These hat, alle Informationen müssen frei sein. Und glaube ich, diese Sache ist das, was dann sozusagen dann als Überbau jetzt wieder in diese kommerzialisierten Netzwerke mit eingeht. Und ich glaube, diesen Hintergrund sollte man schon auch immer ein bisschen mit berücksichtigen, um zu sehen, wo das auch hingehen könnte. Aber jetzt mache ich erstmal Schluss. Ja.
Ich komme jetzt mal vor, aber
Okay, yeah, as he introduced me, I'm an engineer, so this will be a bit more practical now. And it will also include, so it will get a bit more in the future. And I think I have parts of both of the speakers before in this presentation. So maybe again, a bit of my background. I'm a chip developer. So I was this for more than 10 years. But then I thought, well, is that all? Just developing, be a specialist on one field? I also was a nerd, so I had a lot of technology background and interest. And so I thought about how can I bring this together, technology and social. And so I've been getting a social entrepreneur. And what I did, I founded a I founded a platform, helptears.net. It's a combination of the word help and volunteers, and it's a platform for volunteers. So it uses technologies to make volunteering easier. And I also do a podcast. It's called Helden und Visionäre, so heroes and visionaries. And it's there I talk with other social entrepreneurs about their ventures. So sharing is about sharing your moments, your views, your interests. But I thought besides these social aspect, why we are sharing, because we are social beings, there's also something else, because now it's much easier to share. It's very easy to share everything. And I ask, why is it so easy? Because we have tools now. We have a lot of tools, so social network, but also crowdfunding for sharing your idea with the world and to share it so that it comes real. And we have this with code sharing. So open source is also sharing of code. So like in GitHub. So all these tools have a certain mechanism in them. So they link information together, they connect people, and they automate things. And these automation and these things make it much easier. So when we look on open source, for example, it's sharing code and doing something together. In the first generation, it was, you had a static page and then you had communication through email or Newsnet. And now in the second generation, you have a platform, you have a tool for this. For example, GitHub. It makes it much easier to share, so you can easier share and open source your code. And I think this will also happen in the real world. So sharing what we spoke here about was all virtual, sharing information. But I think this will change. So for example, for volunteering, when you change now, when you now share what you are doing on social networks or say, okay, I want to do this or that, who can help me? Then you use social networks. But I think there will be specialized tools to bring people together, to make it more easy to move things. And this through the tools which used by sharing. So the same mechanism like I said before, I can't remember. Okay, so the same mechanism like before, like automation, linking and connecting people. So these tools will help to move people to really do something. And we see this, it's somehow like crowdfunding. It was something new that makes it possible to get funding through sharing and through sharing to social media, but also for special purpose platform like crowdfunding. And this will also happen, I think, in moving people and doing real things in the real world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, all three of you. Just quickly try to summarize. We've heard an almost scientific approach to the word sharing and its semantic changes over the time that social networks, digital social networks existed. And we found out the word sharing itself seems to be a little bit fuzzy, that it can include publishing, forwarding, linking up, connecting, uploading, all these things. So it's not that clear what sharing is. We've then from Florian heard a more political approach and said, look, this is not so easy. We believe we share, but actually on these networks we're being kept captive. We're not being liberated, we're being kept captive because those networks are closing up against each other and they're also trying to suck us in. So the sharing is not so much the thing that we do actively, we share the world or our world with the rest of the world, but the network is actually sucking me in. So what's the idea of sharing in there? So a much more critical approach. And then Georg became more optimistic and said, look, we've got a tool here, a tool that allows us to share very, very easily. And we believe this tool will develop much further to actually really develop sharing, i.e. code sharing, crowdfunding, crowd moving. You maybe have to explain very briefly what crowd moving is.
It's a word which I just made up. So because I say move people and I said crowd moving, so crowdfunding. So it's just made up.
Thank you. Welcome to the world and this new word, crowd moving. Okay, so Nicholas, you've been very, very descriptive in that and very analytical in that. Why do you think the word sharing, almost in a Darwinistic way, survived in social networks? Why is this the word that everyone uses? Why is there such a hype about it?
It's not Darwinistic. It's not Darwinistic. It's there are very large and powerful corporate entities that have a clear interest in us talking in terms of sharing, because as we saw in one of Georg's slides, sharing is rainbows, and of course Facebook, which I use to stand in for all of social media, wants us to share when we think such good things about sharing. I'm not saying that there are such good things about sharing, but that's clearly what. So that's one area where it's clear that there's interest, there's powerful interests, which are kind of hoping that we use that word, and we can, I think, see something similar in the sharing economy, where companies like Airbnb, of course they'd like us to talk about sharing, and that's really part of their vision, that they connect people and that you experience other people's worlds. And there's this idea that through sharing, and this is true for Facebook, for Airbnb, you forge authentic ties with other people.
So to go back to this semantic approach, you would almost say that the word sharing is a euphemism on social networks, and then subscribe to Florian's idea that this euphemism is used to make us believe we're actually sharing something, whereas we're being sucked into something and our data are being used by companies, as we all know. Oh
yeah, I would totally agree with that. Where I'm not sure, I would add something, is that of course it's these social network sites are very protective of their data, but it's not strictly true that they don't talk to each other. In fact, one of the major breakthroughs that Facebook made was putting a share button across the internet and allowing, for instance, your Spotify music to talk to Facebook, and the articles that you've read on the Washington Post to appear on Facebook. And so, in fact, the strength of that social media ecosystem is that all of these websites are actually talking to each other all the time, and constructing very detailed profiles about us.
Florian seems a bit skeptical.
Ja, das sind natürlich nur Versuche, sozusagen, den Einfluss auszubauen, und man muss natürlich dann schauen, dass man die anderen Netzwerke mit einbezieht, damit man nicht zurückfällt. Das ist eine ganz klare, pure Strategie, um die Leute zu halten. Aber ich glaube, man muss auch prinzipiell mal ein bisschen anders hingehen. Es gibt ja einerseits die Ebene des Sharens, also Angebote, Plattformen, auf denen man dann unter bestimmten Mechanismen bestimmte Dinge teilen kann. Und es gibt die Anbieter. Und dazwischen gibt es in aller Regel eine Mauer. Es gibt natürlich möglicherweise, da habe ich mich jetzt leider gar nicht schlau gemacht, möglicherweise auch Open-Source-Netzwerke, die offen sind, die sozusagen sich nicht selber verschließen. Ich glaube, das wäre das Entscheidende daran, dass das natürlich die Netzwerke, die das Sharen anbieten als Ideologie, letztlich auch selber transparent sein müssen und das Sharen auch in der Software mit erlauben, nämlich die Software weiter stricken zu können. Ich glaube, das wäre das Conditio sine qua non, was man machen kann. Und andererseits nur noch ein nebenbei, es klingt immer alles so schön, die Leute teilen ihre Geschichten, natürlich teilen die Nazis auch ihre Gedanken und bilden Gemeinschaften. Der Islamische Staat ist natürlich auch ganz heftig sozusagen als Gemeinschaft im Internet tätiger, nutzt die sozialen Netzwerke aus und dann wird natürlich jetzt versucht, dass man die Firmen zwingt, bestimmte Dinge aus den Netzen zu löschen. Dann stellt sich nun wieder die Frage, welche Netzwerke wollen wir denn haben? Welche Dinge dürfen wir denn tauschen auf den Netzwerken? Da sind wir natürlich zwischen Politik und Copyright, haben wir natürlich noch viele Themen, die man da eigentlich über die Ideologie hinaus mal sich näher anschauen müssen.
I think we'll get back to that a little later, but Georg, the optimist.
Yeah. Regarding the open networks, so there are technological open source networks, but the problem with this is these, or I have to say it in German, Henne-Ei-Problem. So chicken egg problem. So that means if not enough people are using it, no one will use it. And so the not private or not open network, they are doing it that well and they are sucking us that well in so that it's that easy to use it, that all these open source platforms are much better to use. So everyone will will use the one where everyone is in. So, and that's not the open source. That's a problem.
Okay, let's go back just a little bit to all three of you onto the psychology of sharing on social networks, something that we haven't touched yet, and we'll get back to the more political aspects a little later. If I share a holiday picture on Facebook, then I publish a holiday picture, I expect some sort of reaction, this is my reward, my likes, and I'm also giving out my data for that, which is something that I usually forget. In your experience, in your analysis, what drives people to share on social networks?
Well, I'm not a social psychologist, and I guess I know as well as the next person what drives people to share. They enjoy it. It's fun and rewarding. It's a way of showing ourselves to our friends, reminding them that we exist. It's a way of documenting ourselves. All of these things. Everyone can think about why they tweet or why they update Facebook statuses. The question, though, that interests me mostly, there are plenty of researchers who are dealing exactly with that question. The question that I find really interesting is why are we calling it sharing? And when we call it sharing, what does that do to the way we experience what we're doing? I can say something about why we call it sharing, if you like.
Please do.
Something that I found in my research on sharing, and that I'm kind of listening to these fascinating sessions that I've been to in the last day, and really what I want to do is historicize these meanings of the word sharing. There's, generally this approach that sharing is a kind of universal set of values. I don't know, well, maybe, but calling these things sharing is really very new. And even the idea of that, so for instance, the idea of sharing as a kind of talk only dates back to the 1930s. When there was a religious group in the United States called the Oxford Group. They had nothing to do with Oxford University, though they didn't mind people thinking that they did. And what the Oxford Group used to do was, one of its main activities was sharing. What they would do is they would sit members of the group would sit in a circle, and they would publicly confess their sins one to the other. And so this would be a kind of public talk for the sake of redemption, and they called that sharing. And if that sounds like a support group, well, Alcoholics Anonymous came out of the Oxford group and took that practice with it. But this idea of sharing as talk is really very new. And certainly this idea of sharing as being caring, we don't see that before the 1970s. That's a very hippie idea, and this kind of sharing and rainbows, that just doesn't, you only find that in the 1970s. So our very association of sharing with caring is far newer than we think. And then we need to ask, what are the social and cultural contexts in which we associate sharing with caring? And that's what gives sharing the power that it does today, and I think also in shaping then the way we experience the things that we call sharing.
So, in a way, this goes back to the more optimistic view that Georg had, that there is an element of caring in there, of helping, of promoting something that is good in there. So, do you subscribe to what Nicholas said?
So, yeah, I think the future on sharing is, we took this word and we make it very positive. So when you ask my kids, they are not even thinking about sharing. It's just normal. It's like having a chit-chat with someone right next to you. So, and sometimes it doesn't matter if, so it's actually, this word of sharing actually also a lot means not telling one person, so telling everybody who wants to know it. And this is, I think, something that is different to what we had before. Before, when you want to tell the world something, you have to write something or write a book or something. And now you can tell the world, whoever wants to know. And this is the act of sharing.
Mm-hmm. Florian, have they convinced you, despite all odds, that there's something good happening when you share things on social? Okay.
Ich habe ja gesagt, also sich Gemeinschaften durch Sharing kann jede Gruppe, das können böse oder gute sein, das ist vollkommen egal. Also von daher kann man das schon mal ein bisschen neutralisieren, dass der Effekt immer positiv ist. Also es sei denn, man sagt, jede Gruppenbildung ist gut, aber lassen wir mal das beiseite. Ich glaube, man muss ja auch unterscheiden zwischen dem, was in bestimmten Netzwerken an Mechanismen vorhanden ist, wie geteilt wird und wie die Menschen aufgefordert werden, dort zu teilen, und den allgemeinen Begriff des Teilens oder Sharens. Also wenn man jetzt eben bei Facebook mal schaut oder bei anderen Netzwerken, dann ist, glaube ich, eben schon das Prinzip dessen da, dass über Aufmerksamkeitserzeugung die Menschen sozusagen da reingezogen werden. Und es geht ja nicht nur um Scheren eben von einem Bild, was sagst du dazu, sondern man versucht sozusagen, es wird ja immer mehr gemessen sozusagen. Man wird ja sozusagen vermessen in diesen Netzwerken. Und das ist, glaube ich, der wirkliche Effekt. Das ist ja ähnlich wie Casting funktioniert und ähnliches. Also man steckt ständig in diesen Konkurrenzsystemen letztlich. Und schaut, dass man da nicht runterfällt oder dass man möglichst hochkommt oder dass man sozusagen sich erweitern kann. Aber ich glaube, das ist das Grundprinzip dessen, was die kommerziellen sozialen Netzwerke eigentlich machen. Und das sieht man im Fernsehen ja auch, oder das sieht man auch in anderen Bereichen, muss ja jetzt nicht nur in den sozialen Netzwerken sein, Städte-Rankings, Uni-Rankings, Zitationsrankings in den Wissenschaften. Also sozusagen dieses Prinzip wird nur dort nochmal perfektioniert und sozusagen wirklich als Falle nochmal aufgestellt. Und ich glaube, man muss eben ein bisschen unterscheiden zwischen Sharing, wo es stattfindet, auf welchen Plattformen das stattfindet, ob man jetzt auf einem öffentlichen Platz das macht, wegen mir etwas teilt, oder ob es eben privater Platz ist, der ganz bestimmte Bedingungen setzt, wie das zu machen ist. Also im öffentlichen Platz natürlich auch, dass Gesetze vorhanden sind, aber ich glaube, man müsste viel mehr differenzieren in dem Bereich, um dann klar sehen zu können, um was es eigentlich wirklich geht.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so it has two sides of the same coin, because actually what these companies are using are algorithms, and you can use them for something good, so to filter out the information someone wants to know, but you can also filter out something that the owner wants to know that the people know it. So
deswegen ist Offenheit wichtig. Die gibt es eben nicht. Die sozialen Netzwerke bauen auf Intransparenz auf. Das ist ja das Verrückte. Genauso wie der Facebook-Mensch sich einigelt, die Häuser um sein Haus herum aufkauft, damit es sozusagen nicht eingesehen werden kann. Also das ist sozusagen der Kern der ganzen Ideologie.
Yeah. But having a totally open algorithm has also a problem. So, for example, when Google would tell how it works, everyone would treat their own webpage so that it will be ranked best. It's always a run against the algorithm. And so that's the same in the social networks, and the companies are using it. I'm also not a fan about it. So I'm not a fan about these structures, so that these are private companies which are doing this and having these algorithm. But currently there is no better alternative to have something to get the information over all these, or get the right information for me, over all these information which are out there.
Ja, aber das ist ja nur ein Versprechen. Also solange wir die Software, den Algorithmus nicht kennen, können wir nur darauf vertrauen, wie eben Google sagt, es ist objektiv, also wir mischen uns da nicht ein, wir präferieren nichts, aber das können wir ja nur glauben. Das heißt, wir müssen also im Privatunternehmen glauben, dass es sozusagen eine ordentliche Welt macht und sozusagen alles schön sauber erzeugt, aber das kann man nicht wirklich glauben. Yes. Bei Facebook gibt es ja schon auch Beispiele, wie da manchmal vielleicht Informationsquellen sozusagen dann den Nutzern zugespielt werden. Wir wissen es nicht, dass sozusagen die Software verschlossen ist, können wir nicht wissen, ob wir der vertrauen können. Das ist das Paradox an der ganzen Geschichte.
So we need a way to control the controller.
I believe we can all agree in this lively discussion that if we share something, that we're actually exchanging something. We're exchanging our information with the data we're providing to the social network. Well, we'll not talk about this too much today. If for just a second we replace the term sharing with what it really is, we're communicating, we're maybe collaborating in your future world. No? Is there a chance in making this discussion a little more neutral and a little more directed towards the future? Where will this go? Maybe start with the optimist.
Well, no, making it neutral, I think, will not work, because our world is not neutral. So it's always a fight between different. So we can make it more open, more transparent, so that everybody see who is against something or is fighting behind. So that we can make, but making neutral, I don't think that's possible.
Will we still be using the word sharing in 10 years' time when we talk about social networks?
Yes. My feeling is this, actually, that, but first of all, if I just may say, I mean, I'm just as critical of social media as the next critic, but if you know, the future of the word sharing. I mean, words change their meaning over time, right? That's just what they do. I mean, as I just said before, sharing means now different things from what it used to do 100 years ago, and certainly 2 or 3. And I mean, one of the reasons I know this, I've sat looking at thousands of uses of the word sharing over 300 or 400 years to see how it's changed. So words change their meaning, and so to say that this is what sharing really is or isn't, to me doesn't really make much sense. So my approach to the word sharing is non-prescriptivist. It's a pragmatic approach, what linguists call a pragmatic approach to the word sharing. So it's going to keep changing. I think that in 10 years' time, yes, probably within social media, we will still be talking about sharing. Something that I think I've noticed, fortunately, Trebor Scholz, who is here in Weimar, I'm going to collar him and ask him whether this is something that he did on purpose. Trebor Scholz is very critical of what we call the sharing economy. And he says it's about the exploitation of workers, and I can completely identify and agree with his critique. So he's promoting a model that he calls platform cooperativism. And when you read his texts about that, there's very little talk about sharing. It suggests to me that he has, but I want to ask him, that he has foregone sharing as a word that contains positive social relations, that he's leaving the word sharing to Uber and Airbnb, and what he's promoting is kind of something else. And so maybe in 10 years' time, the word sharing will mean renting. For instance, a very short anecdote, I was in Manhattan doing some field work. I was at a sharing economy meetup. There were plenty of entrepreneurs there, and one of them, sitting in a panel very much like this, was talking about different models of the sharing economy. She said there are some models where you share for free, there are some models where you share for money, and then she carried on talking, and no one in the audience put up their hand and said, "Excuse me, what do you mean sharing for money?" But maybe that's what the word will mean. It will mean renting through an app. And that doesn't mean, though, that the values that we also associate with sharing now will be gone. They're still there. We still should aspire to them. But it may mean that the word sharing will come to mean something different than what we're used to. And that's kind of okay, because it only meant fairness in the last 50 or 70 years in any case.
Thank you for that. I think it's time to open up to the audience if there are any questions at this point. Yes, please.
Thank you for your thoughts. I have a question related to the term brought by Nicholas, those fuzzy objects. So looks like those fuzzy objects before now became concrete objects on the social networks. They somehow diverse in the form of status updates, preferences, personal preferences that people post on the social media, giving plus metadata, biometrical information from the apps that track workouts or whatever. So I was wondering if the panel have an idea how this diverse fuzzy now, I believe, concrete objects hang together as an analytical category, and would looking on those emergent sharing objects side by side make them let's say, help us to understand the current terrain of sharing. Did I make it myself clear?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a really interesting point. I mean, all I mean is that when we share our life, or share the real you. There's one website that encourages us to do that. That's fuzzy in the sense that it really could be anything, and like I said before, it's meant to be anything. They want anything, but thank you for pointing out that when you share anything or everything, you create data that is very much concrete, and it's the currency of the social media landscape. Absolutely, and that data is turned into money by companies like Facebook.
Okay, any other points and questions? Yes, maybe the lady up front here. Oh, okay, just as well.
Thank you. Well, it's not exactly a question, but a comment. As I have a background in psychoanalysis, I think I can give some words about why people enjoy sharing. We are social beings by excellence. So, since the beginning, human beings have a tendency towards the other. Since the beginning, our self-identity, by the way, we depend on the other for our survival. So our self-identity is constructed by the image of the other. So the contradiction is inside us. So sharing is an unavoidable tendency.
Thank you very much for this additional comment. Actually, that rounds it up really well. There was another question or comment here?
I wanted to share my small family drama. My husband, sometimes when I speak to him, he scrolls Facebook in mobile phone. And I ask him, why you do this? And he said, it's so nice. I can always choose interesting and not to read what is not interesting. And when somebody writes something that is not interesting at all, I can hide it. And when you speak, I have to listen from the beginning till the end. And it's about the situation of ranging information that I be sharing. I attract the people, and I create this information channel. I create this a kind of channel, and I receive always the like cakes every day. I eat only cakes, and it's also about sharing, but also creation these information channels, like from this story with my husband. I wanted to share.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Deutsch oder Englisch? Egal. Ich mache mal auf Deutsch. Ich bin etwas unzufrieden mit dem Begriff Sharing für das alles, was wir gerade hier gehört haben, weil es doch sehr unterschiedlich ist. Also gerade das, was Facebook macht, ist eigentlich ja eine Liste. Das ist meines Erachtens keine wirkliche Kommunikation, die Sharing eigentlich impliziert für mich. Wenn man jetzt auf GitHub zum Beispiel geht, das ist Kommunikation, das ist Zusammenarbeit, da ist es eine ganz andere Nummer. Und ich bin, wo gerade Florian Rötzer da vorne sitzt, gerade bei Heise ist es sehr erstaunlich, dass die unterschiedlichen Foren der unterschiedlichen Themengebiete unterschiedliche Darstellungen haben von den Diskussionslisten. Vielleicht gibt es da von Florian Rötzer eine Aussage dazu, was die Intention beim Heise Verlag dazu ist. Kennt die jemand? Nee. Okay. Genau, also der Unterschied zwischen, was ist das Sharing eigentlich, oder ist es nicht eigentlich mehr Show-Off? Und ist es andere Sharing nicht eigentlich Collaborate, oder wie man es immer auch nennt?
Dazu noch? Ne? I'm not sure whether you were there right at the beginning. I think this is how Nicholas started, of saying the word sharing, and the activities that are behind sharing have developed. But they've all converged into this fuzzy word sharing that actually implies a lot of things that we, in our heads, don't actually analyze anymore. Huh? So in a way, I think this was the start, and I hope this is a message that went through. Right? We don't analyze anymore. Yes. Yes. Ja, Mikrofon.
Aber man kann doch nicht dabei stehen bleiben, festzustellen, dass es eine Lehrformel ist. Man muss doch selber seinen Kopf anstrengen, um zu analysieren, was ist es eigentlich, das als Sharing bezeichnet wird. Sonst trägt man dazu bei, dass das weiter als Lehrformel zirkuliert, genauso wie diese Formel vom Social. Was heißt Social in Social Network? Das müssten wir doch analysieren. Und wenn die Frage gestellt wird, aus welchen Motiven heraus Leute ihr Foto angeblich teilen, sie verteilen es, das ist eine Distribution, dann kann man nicht sagen, ich weiß nichts von Psychoanalyse, sondern dann muss man das studieren. Weil das ist eine neue Form des Narzissmus, die da stattfindet. Ich schicke mein Foto weg, um eine Anerkennung zu kriegen. Und die Anerkennung findet nicht mehr intersubjektiv statt, sondern durch ein Like oder Unlike. Ich meine, was ist das Soziale daran? Wenn wir nicht die Transformation der Bedeutung von Sozial und Teilen mit in die Analyse mit hineinnehmen, dann wird das nur konformiert.
Can we go back to you in this, Nicholas? Any comments on this? Because I mean, your approach, as I said, was very descriptive. It was not giving a value on this analysis. And how could you? The lady asked, well, we should really do this. This is our almost a political and a socio-political responsibility that we now have to query this idea of sharing, to go different, to have a different approach on all this.
Yes, well, I think I kind of hinted at that by showing that Facebook and the rest of them talk about selling data as sharing. They call that sharing, and I hope the critique in that is clear. You're right. My project is in many ways descriptive. I want to describe and account for what sharing means today. But in doing that, I think I also show, I mean, I haven't succeeded in showing that today. For that, I mean, you know, I read the book soon enough. But that the idea of sharing today is tied up with powerful corporations, be they sharing economy companies, Facebook, and so on. And it's also to do with how we relate to other people. This is very, I mean, in this regard, I'm very much a student of Eva Luz in that we live in a therapeutic society where the way we access our authentic selves and the way we engage authentically with other people is through speech, is through talk, through communicating. And that's also called sharing. And so I think that ultimately what we can see is a kind of bundle of activities that are called sharing, but that describe for many of us what it's like to live now. We communicate through commercially owned social network sites, which are profiling us and making money from every action that we take on them. We are encouraged to open our houses to let other people sleep in our spare bedrooms or on our couch, very often for money. And if we don't do that, then maybe we shouldn't complain that we're poor. This is a kind of a critique of this idea of the micro-entrepreneur and the penetration of neoliberalism into the very fabric of family life. And that we also need to talk with our partners and with our significant others in order to achieve a sense of authenticity. But all of these things are kind of tied up together, which is how Airbnb can say that you can that you can have an authentic encounter with another country by staying in an Airbnb apartment rather than in another placeless hotel. You could be anywhere in the world. So that's kind of what I really try to get to, this bundling of these different types of sharing together to say something, I think, critical about the place of corporations and capitalism.
Thank you very much. Good. One more question from the audience. Yeah. Ronald, ja.
Ja, mich würde von den Podiumsteilnehmern mal interessieren, wir sehen, was passiert im Netz, in neuen sozialen Netzwerken. Aber wie sich, sagen wir, das Verhalten und die Werte von Menschen darin verändern. Ich habe den Eindruck, dass wir zum Beispiel eine Veränderung haben in der Begrifflichkeit, was ist eigentlich privat oder was ist eigentlich öffentlich. Und damit meine ich nicht nur, dass vielleicht die Aufhebung von, dass man zu Hause auch arbeitet oder so. Aber wir bekommen anderes Verständnis von uns selbst, von unseren Beziehungen, von Werten. Und da würde mich mal interessieren, Sie, die mit den technischen Aspekten zu tun haben, wie nehmen Sie das denn wahr?
Technische Aspekte. Okay, I will. Okay, so I think that will be very complicated because stop it. So there is a theory which is called post-privacy, which puts this together. So through sharing and through all this algorithm, we are connecting each other. All what we do is more and more transparent. And from the technical side, we cannot be sure, for example, that what we write in Facebook will always be only in Facebook. It can be hacked someday, and everything what we ever write in there can be, like the Panama paper, visible for everyone. So this is something between technology and our society. And I think the problem is that we cannot really control it. So everyone can say, okay, I will not share anymore. But even then, others will share about you something. So it's a question about society, how we deal with it. So I think it will be a problem between private and public. It may be not all the time as it is now.
I think a profound discussion into how our privacy ideas are changing would take another hour and a half there. But I'm glad that came up at the end because it was missing. This is what you get when you get a linguist, a critical political journalist, and an optimist in this respect, because you're putting your skills to very good use on a panel and discuss a subject that is very, very big. I do hope, though, that the audience took something out of this. I certainly learned something on the term of sharing, the political and critical and economic dangers and potentials of sharing. And of course, I'm also glad that we had a very, very optimistic approach represented by Georg and there. I hope you're taking something out of this. Thank you very much to Nicholas, to Georg and to Florian and to the audience for a lively participation. Vielen Dank, tschüss und weiter schönes Symposium.